rise and betrayal. The cold mist of dawn clung to the grey stones of the tower. Crows circled above as if the walls themselves still remembered the screams that once echoed here. The Tower of London, a fortress, a palace, and a prison, had seen kings crowned and queens condemned. But beneath its grandeur lies a darker truth, the tales of women whose crowns became their curses. The rise of Anne Boleyn. In the early 16th century, the English court glittered with power and intrigue. Among the courtiers stood a woman whose charm would change the fate of England, Anne Boleyn. She wasn't born royal. She wasn't even meant to wear a crown. Yet her wit, her confidence, and her refusal to be like other women caught the eye of a king, Henry VIII. Henry was already married to Queen Catherine of Aragon, but his heart, and his ambition, shifted. Anne was no simple lady-in-waiting, she was a storm wrapped in silk. She resisted him, teased him, and refused to become his mistress. For a king who always got what he wanted, that resistance was intoxicating. Years of passion, letters, and political maneuvering later, Catherine was cast aside. The church was defied. Anne was crowned queen. The bells of London rang, but beneath their melody hid whispers. She will bring ruin. For 3 brief years, Anne sat on England's most glittering throne, and walked on its thinnest ice. When she bore a daughter, not a son, the court turned cold. That daughter would later become one of England's greatest rulers, Elizabeth I, but at that time, Anne's failure to produce a male heir sealed her fate. Her enemies whispered that she bewitched the king, that she was unfaithful, that she plotted his death. In truth, Anne's only crime was being too powerful in a man's world. In May 1536, she was taken to the Tower, the same place where she had once been celebrated. Witnesses say she walked with grace, her black gown flowing like a shadow. When the French swordsman raised his blade, she whispered a prayer for the king who had condemned her. One strike, and silence. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched, as if history itself had paused. The queen was dead, and the crown trembled. The fall of Catherine Howard. But Henry VIII's hunger for love, or power, did not end with Anne. A few years later, another young woman would catch his aging eye, Catherine Howard, barely 17, full of laughter and innocence. She was Anne's cousin, a mirror of youth and beauty that reminded the old king of the days he longed to relive. At first, the court rejoiced. The new queen was radiant, her smile like spring after a brutal winter. She danced, sang, and brought warmth to the palace halls. But behind the curtains of joy lay secrets darker than any royal scandal. Catherine had a past, one she couldn't erase. Before her marriage, she had been entangled in youthful relationships that, once exposed, became weapons in the hands of her enemies. And when whispers reached the king that his young bride had taken a lover even after the wedding, rage consumed him. In the cold halls of Hampton Court, Catherine was arrested. The girl who once ran through gardens in silk now screamed for mercy on stone floors. She was only 19. They say when she was led to the Tower, she asked for the execution block to be brought to her cell, so she could practice how to place her head upon it. When the morning came, her trembling voice prayed for forgiveness. The axe fell, and the air was still again. Another queen, another ghost. The web of power. The Tudor court was more than a palace, it was a web. Every smile hid a plan. Every favor was a trap. Anne and Catherine were not the first victims of power, and they would not be the last. Each execution was wrapped in justification, treason, adultery, betrayal. But beneath those words was the same unspoken truth: a woman who rose too high, who spoke too freely, who dared to hold influence, had to fall. The Tower's stones remember them all. The queens who walked proudly to their deaths, not as victims, but as symbols of the dangerous beauty of ambition. As dawn broke once more over London, the city stirred awake, unaware that history's ghosts still whispered through its streets, of crowns won by love and lost to fear. The fall and legacy. The Tower slept, but its ghosts did not. Each night, the wind carried whispers of silk and sorrow. The same walls that had heard Anne and Catherine's final prayers were now silent witnesses to another generation's fear of the crown, and of what it could cost. The cursed bloodlines. The executions of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were not just stories of love turned to betrayal, they were omens. Each death had rippled through the monarchy like a curse that refused to fade. The crown Henry VIII had worn so proudly was now heavy with guilt, and its legacy would bleed into the centuries that followed. Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, grew up in the shadow of that blade, a child whose very birth had destroyed her mother. She learned early that love was dangerous, and trust could kill. By the time she became queen, she ruled not with her heart but with her mind, sharp, calculating, unyielding. The ghosts of her mother and cousin haunted her throne. And perhaps that's why she never married. Perhaps, deep down, she knew what it meant to be a queen who loved a man more than power. But long before Elizabeth's golden reign came to its peak, the Tower claimed yet another royal soul, one whose fall would shatter the illusion that nobility could ever escape its shadow. Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day Queen. She was only 16 when they placed the crown upon her head. Lady Jane Grey, a girl born into politics she never wanted. She did not seek the throne sought her. When King Edward VI died young, England trembled. The question of succession was not merely about bloodline, it was about religion, loyalty, and survival. The powerful Duke of Northumberland saw in Jane a pawn, educated, Protestant, and easily manipulated. He married her to his son, and convinced the dying king to name her his heir. And so, against her will, she became Queen of England. But London did not rejoice. The streets whispered another name, Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, rightful heir by blood and faith. Within days, an army of Mary's supporters marched to London. The people opened the gates for her. And Jane, who had never wanted to be queen, found herself locked in the Tower. They called her the 9-day Queen. Her reign ended before it began. In her cell, Jane read her Bible, wrote letters to her family, and waited for a mercy that would never come. On February 12, 1554, she was led to the same courtyard where queens before her had died. The executioner asked for her forgiveness. She smiled, calm, almost peaceful. When she couldn't find the block, she whispered softly, "What shall I do? Where is it?" A kind hand guided her. Moments later, history closed another chapter with the thud of an axe. A girl who never wanted power died because of it. Mary Stuart, the Queen of Shadows. If Lady Jane Grey's tragedy was innocence, Mary Stuart's was defiance. Born a queen, raised in luxury, and destined for disaster, Mary, Queen of Scots, was a storm waiting to strike. Her life was a tale of beauty, betrayal, and blood. Married young, widowed young, and surrounded by those who wanted her throne or her life, often both. When her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, took the English crown, Mary became both her mirror and her nightmare. Where Elizabeth ruled with logic, Mary ruled with emotion. And in that contrast lay their destiny. Fleeing Scotland after rebellion and scandal, Mary sought Elizabeth's protection, a fatal mistake. Instead of finding safety, she found a cell. For 19 years she lived as a prisoner in England, a queen in name, a captive in truth. Yet even behind bars, her presence was dangerous. Plots bloomed in her name. Rebels swore loyalty to her cause. And Elizabeth, haunted by her mother's ghost, knew what must be done. In 1587, the warrant was signed. Mary Stuart was to die, not as a criminal, but as a symbol. She walked to the scaffold in crimson, the color of martyrdom. Her last words, "In manus tuas, Domini," into your hands, O Lord. It took 3 blows of the axe to sever her head. When the executioner lifted it high, her wig fell away, revealing white hair beneath, a queen aged before her time. A stunned silence fell upon the hall. Even those who condemned her could not escape the weight of what they had done. The legacy of fear. The Tower had claimed queens, cousins, and generations of bloodlines. Yet even centuries later, the echo of those deaths reshaped monarchy forever. After Mary Stuart's execution, Elizabeth was never the same. The woman who had outsmarted kings and conquered empires began to fade beneath the burden of guilt and age. Power, she had learned, was never owned, only borrowed. And for every crown placed upon a head, a shadow waited behind it. The deaths of these women carved into history a cruel truth: that in the halls of power, love is weakness, and loyalty is a weapon. From Anne's defiance to Catherine's tears, from Jane's innocence to Mary's pride, each story whispered the same message: that the cost of being queen was not the crown itself, but surviving long enough to wear it. The ghosts of the Tower. Centuries passed. The world changed. Empires rose and fell, yet the Tower stood, timeless, silent, unbroken. Visitors today walk its corridors with cameras and curiosity, unaware that beneath their feet lie bones that once wore crowns. At night, guards swear they hear soft footsteps near the chapel. A rustle of silk. A faint whisper. Sometimes a quiet laugh. They say and still walks the Tower green, her head held high. They say Catherine's voice echoes faintly when the wind blows through the archways. And on cold February mornings, a single white dove circles above the scaffold's site, the spirit of Jane Grey, still searching for her peace. Perhaps the Tower is not cursed. Perhaps it merely remembers. And in remembering, it mourns. The eternal lesson. History often glorifies kings, their wars, their victories, their legacies written in stone. But behind every empire stood women whose blood paid the price for ambition. Their stories remind us that power is not eternal, that truth is fragile, and that justice, in every age, is written by the victor. The Tower may no longer claim queens, but its shadow still falls upon every throne in the world. And in that silence, between the chime of the bells and the rustle of ravens, one can still hear them whisper,